Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Zumir. I'll be your teacher for today in this recorded lesson. Now, before we continue with Unit 5, we'll recap on previous lessons. So in Units 1 to 4, we went over many things, such as is change good or bad, some vocabulary, what's more important, taste or nutrition. We went over suffixes, and so on. And in the first part of Unit 5, we talked about what risks are good to take. That's what we talked about in the previous lesson. So we talked about risks and desired outcomes. So for example, the risks of having to quit a job is that you might not find another job, or you might find a better job. So obviously having to quit your job is a risk, and the outcome will depend on many factors. We also went over some vocabulary such as audience, funds, income. So income is your salary. Audience is the people who are watching, your fans. We also went over cardinal and ordinal numbers. So we cardinal all numbers are like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And ordinal numbers are first, second, third, and fourth, and so on. Now, we also talked about Venn diagram, which presents information, as you can see on page 100. Presents information between two things, two people or two things. Can be animals as well. So on either side you have the differences, and in the middle you have the comparison, what they both have in common. We also finally touched upon word families. Verbs can be turned into nouns and adjectives and adverbs, as you can see on page 103. Now, in today's lecture, we'll talk about the past perfect, contraction of had, and giving a short presentation. So let's proceed. So what is past perfect? Well, it shows the relationship between two events or actions that happened in the past. So guys, we're on page 104. Participle ends in ed, d, t, en, or n. So when do we use the past perfect tense? The past perfect tense takes place before another past action. So I noticed here is the past action, that he had left his books behind. So the word left here is the past perfect. How do we know? Because it's next to the verb had. So remember, the past perfect is always with the verb had. Now going back to the book, another example, past perfect. The match had already started. We arrived late. Had already started. That's the past perfect. And the simple past, we arrived late. It says here you can use past perfect with past time clauses that begin with when, before, by the time, and until. So past perfect, first event. He had been at work for hours, meaning he's been at work for a long time. Simple past, when we called him. So as you can see, they've underlined the past time clauses, and these are when, before, by the time, and until. Now let's read on through the rest of the examples. Paul had driven for an hour. That means he's been driving for 1 hour. Before, he noticed he had a flat tire. So he's driving for 1 hour, then he noticed, he realized, he was aware that one of his tires was flat. Okay, next one. They had already eaten dinner by the time I got home. So what this means is when you went home, they could relate, they could mean your family, your friends, your roommates. So as soon as you come home, you open the door, they had already eaten dinner. Last one, I hadn't heard anything about it until I read the paper this morning. So this person wasn't aware of what was going on until they read the paper in the morning. Yeah, and at the bottom it says note. The past perfect is often used with the adverbs already, yet, never, ever, and just. Pardon me. Now you need to complete exercises A and B. So exercise A, it says read the pairs of sentences. Write next to the sentence that happened first. Write 2 next to the sentence that happened second. Then you need to write one sentence. Use the past time clause in the parenthesis. So before we do that, let's identify what this word means. So parenthesis is basically the word in the bracket. So number 1, before. Then number 2, until. So what it means here, parenthesis is just the bracket. That's what it means. It just means the bracket. Okay, number 2. So number 1 has been done for us. The scientist retired. He began research on a new area of interest. Okay, and then you have to write a sentence. The scientist had retired before he began research on a new area of interest. Okay. I didn't hear about Bonomia Barry. Okay, I read the article. Okay, so what the answer here will be, I hadn't heard about Bonomia Barry until I read the article. Until I had read the article, sorry. I didn't hear about Bonomia Barry until I had read the article. Okay. Number 3 I'll do with you as well. It started to rain. Then the second one, we finished hiking. So we finished hiking will be number 1, and number 2 will be it started to rain. So we finished hiking before it had started to rain. Before it had started to rain. Okay, and now I will leave you to do the rest by yourselves, and if you have any questions, I'm sure we can communicate via Blackboard in the future. Okay, moving on to exercise B. Complete the sentences with information that is true for you. Okay, so what you need to do is, as you can see, it says work with your partner, but under these conditions you'll be working by yourself. So there's no right or wrong answer here, it's just about your opinion, what's true for you. So let's go on to the next page. Page 106. So, contraction of had. First of all, what is the meaning of contraction? So it means to make something small, the opposite of expand. Yeah. So in this instance, in this example, when we're talking about English grammar, it's when we get 2 words and we make them into one. For example, I am becomes I'm. We are becomes we're. you are is becomes your. Yeah, that's meant to say you are becomes your. So I'm, where, and your, these are called contractions.
Unit 5.
Okay, now we move on to exercise A. It says listen to the sentences, tick the sentences that you hear. So I'll play this twice for you.
Unit 5. Pronunciation. Activity A. 1,
He'd worked at a bookstore.
2,
We left when it started raining.
3,
They answered the questions.
4,
I'd eaten my lunch.
5,
You'd already taken the test.
6,
She hadn't worked there.
7,
It hasn't started to rain.
8,
Had he found it?
9,
Have you called Alex?
Okay, exercise B. It says, okay, I'll play exercise A again for you.
Unit 5. Pronunciation. Activity A. 1,
He'd worked at a bookstore.
2,
We left when it started raining.
3,
They answered the questions.
4,
I'd eaten my lunch.
5,
You'd already taken the test.
6,
She hadn't worked there.
7,
It hasn't started to rain.
8,
Had he found it?
9,
Have you called Alex?
Okay, guys. Once you've done that, you can check your answers. You can also play back this lesson to look at and check for the answers. Now,
Unit 5. Unit 5.
page 107. It's talking about giving a short presentation. When you give a short presentation in class or at work, start by introducing your topic clearly. Here are some phrases you can use to introduce your topic. I want to talk about, my topic is, this presentation is on, I'm going to talk about. So at the beginning of this lecture, I said we're going to recap on previous lectures. Then I said on this lecture, we're going to continue with Unit 5. So the topic was Unit 5. So I used some, what we call signposting. And we've talked about signposting before in the past. It's very important when giving presentations. It lets the audience know where you are in regards to the lecture, if you're at the beginning of the lecture, the middle, or the end. For example, somebody might come late to the lecture, maybe 20 or 30 minutes late. And by identifying which language the teacher is using, you'll be able to know at what part of the lecture the teacher's on and how much you've missed. Maybe if he says, I'm going to talk about, or I want to talk about, then at least you know you haven't missed anything. If he says, for example, in conclusion, to summarize, then you know he's at the end of his lecture and you've missed almost all the lecture. So let's carry on reading on page 107. Yeah, so it says, during your presentation, it is important to use words and phrases that help your audience understand the order of events and the reasons for them. So the order of events is the beginning, middle, and end. Here are some words and phrases you can use to help your audience follow and understand your presentation. Order of events: first, second, after that, then, before, by the time. Then we have purpose, reason, so that, in order to, the reason I took this risk was. So again, these are some examples of signposting language. There are many phrases you could use outside this book, and if you want to look into more, then you can Google signposting, and it's written on the screen in front of you. Signposting is very important. Yeah, that's what you need to Google if you want to look into it further. So more examples of signposting on this page I've got for you. Time or sequence: first, second, next, then, later, before, while, and so on. So the example is, finally, the agreement needs senior management approval before it can be approved. Yeah, so before it can be approved, the senior management need to approve it. Yeah. Then we have type, cause and effect: because, as a result, therefore. So here you're giving a reason, the cause and effect, and the result. As a result of the delay, the company's expenses were adversely affected. So adversely here is negative. They were affected in a bad way. Okay, if you want to add information, you can use words like also, in addition, moreover, besides, furthermore, as well as, or, and, nor. And the example given: moreover, further research has revealed a specific need for quality assurance measures. Moreover, so in addition, you're adding more information on top of previous information. So you said one set of information, you want to add more information, use these words. So we're here. compare and contrast. So to contrast here means to show the difference. The examples are given. In contrast, on the other hand, instead, and rather. So, on the other hand, allowing staff to choose their own workflow processes has proved successful. Yeah? Next type, give a condition or concession. Okay? Words like however, yet, nevertheless, despite, otherwise. The example given here is, however, promoting the product before it was complete did not prove worthwhile. Yes? So, what does the word concession here mean? So, I want you to use your phones to look up the meaning of the word concession. And once you've done that, we can move on. Okay, next word. Clarifying, giving examples. So, to give examples or to clarify. So to clarify, use words such as in fact, in other words. And to give examples, you would use for example, in a case in point. What that means is you're just giving an example. In fact, the rise in the dollar was partly attributed to the downturn in exports. So, we're going to watch a video here, a good presentation versus a bad presentation. So listen carefully.
Hello everyone, welcome to Public Speaking. Today's first presenter is Ranjit, and I would ask everyone to give him their full attention. Chantal, could you dim the lights, please?
The British imposed a lot of unpopular taxes on the American colonists and didn't let them elect representatives to the British government. In retaliation, the Americans started to boycott British goods. In 1773, Americans in Massachusetts dumped a shipload of British tea into Boston Harbor. This became known as the Boston Tea Party. As punishment, the British imposed laws known as the Intolerable Acts, including the Quartering Act, which made Americans let British soldiers live in their homes. Some of the American colonies created a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, which they sent to Britain, but the British just sent soldiers to the colonies to put down any rebellion. This led to the first battles of the Revolution at Lexington and Concord.
Thank you, Ranjit. I know it's very hard to give a presentation in front of the entire class. Now, would anyone like to offer Ranjit constructive feedback about his presentation? Any tips for what he might do differently next time? For example, were you all able to hear what Ranjit was saying?
Not really. He needs to speak louder and face the audience.
Yes. Great suggestion. Anyone else?
He was reading from his paper, so it didn't feel like he was really talking to us, you know?
Exactly. It's important when you're speaking to look up every sentence or two and make eye contact with someone in the audience. Anything else that Ranjit could do to appear more relaxed and feel more confident?
He could smile more.
Yes. Smiling makes us feel relaxed. Oh, and make sure your phone is off before you speak next time. I do have one more suggestion. To connect with listeners, it's a great idea to use a personal story or experience as an example. Can you try that next time?
I think so, yes. Next week, my presentation will be about the causes and effects of stress.
We look forward to hearing it. Ranjit is first up again today, and I look forward to his new presentation. Jorge, could you dim the lights, please?
Good morning. Today I'd like to talk about the causes and effects of stress and how to cope with stress. Stress has many causes, including work or school, life events, changes, or unrealistic expectations of yourself. Some effects of stress include headaches, trouble sleeping, depression, or lack of concentration. I know how hard it can be to deal with stress. Last year, I started working after school to save for college, but I didn't have time to do homework and my grades went down. I had trouble sleeping, I only ate junk food, and I stopped hanging out with my friends. Fortunately, I was able to talk with a school counselor to manage my stress. She suggested that I reduce my hours at my job, eat healthy foods, and get some exercise. So I literally started walking home from school and bringing my lunch. I also asked my teachers for extra help. Now, I feel better. It's important to recognize when you're stressed and to ask for help. Thank you.
Great work, Ranjit. I want you all to reflect on how much stronger today's presentation was. Ranjit looked us in the eyes, he spoke clearly, he smiled at us, and he used a personal anecdote to help us feel more connected to him. Well done.
Thank you, sir.
Okay guys, so what can we take from this video? So as you heard, the key, well, let's talk about the bad points first. The bad points are what? His phone was on, it rang. He didn't look at the audience, he was looking at the paper. He wasn't prepared, he didn't speak clearly, and he didn't smile. And in the second presentation, it was the opposite. His phone was off, he wasn't looking at his paper, he was looking at the audience. He related it to the audience, he had a connection with them. He was more prepared, he spoke clearly, and he smiled more. Okay, so that's what makes a good presentation. So, going to page 108. Exercise A. It says, listen to this presentation. Complete the sentences with the words and phrases you hear.
Unit 5. Speaking skill. Activity A.
I'm going to talk about a time I took a risk and it turned out well. I'd always wanted to learn to speak Japanese. When I was in high school, I started to take classes in Japanese. By the time I graduated from college, I had studied the language for 8 years, but I still couldn't speak it very well. So I decided to go to Japan to study. I didn't know anyone there. My grandmother had given me money the year before, so I used that for the trip. Before I left, I'd done some research on language schools. I stayed in Japan for 3 months and met some great people there. My Japanese improved a lot. By the time I finally returned to my country, I had become fluent.
Okay guys, I'll play that one more time for you.
Unit 5. Speaking skill. Activity A.
I'm going to talk about a time I took a risk and it turned out well. I'd always wanted to learn to speak Japanese. When I was in high school, I started to take classes in Japanese. By the time I graduated from college, I had studied the language for 8 years, but I still couldn't speak it very well. So I decided to go to Japan to study. I didn't know anyone there. My grandmother had given me money the year before, so I used that for the trip. Before I left, I'd done some research on language schools. I stayed in Japan for 3 months and met some great people there. My Japanese improved a lot. By the time I finally returned to my country, I had become fluent.
Okay guys, thank you very much. Now moving on to exercise B. It says tick the risks you would take to learn English. Add some of your own ideas. So here you only add 2 of your own ideas. So it says join a club or sports team where people speak English.
Unit 5. Speaking
Take
skill.
classes in other
Activity
subjects with
A.
native English speakers.
I'm going to talk about a time I
Move to
took
a
a
new
risk
city
and it
or
turned out
country.
well. I'd
Read
always
and
wanted
talk
to learn to speak
native
Japanese.
speakers.
When I was in high school,
Travel
I
in
started to take
English-speaking
classes in
countries.
Japanese.
So just tick the
By the
ones
time
that
I
you
graduated
would
from college,
take.
I had studied
Which
the
risks you
language
would
for
take,
8
so there's
years,
no
but I
right
still
or
couldn't
wrong
speak it
answers.
very well.
It's up to
So
you.
I decided to go to Japan to
Okay
study.
guys, that's the end
I didn't know
of
anyone there.
Unit 5.
My grandmother had given me
looking
money
at
the year
page
before,
109,
so I used that
there
for
are
the trip.
some
Before I
words
left, I'd
that
done
you
some
should have
research on
learnt
language
in this
schools.
unit.
I stayed in
If you
Japan for
have
3 months
difficulty
and met
recalling
some
any
great
of these
people there.
words,
My Japanese
you
improved a
should
lot.
go back
By the
to those
time I
words,
finally returned to my
understand
country,
them
I
and
had
learn
become
them and
fluent.
practice them and use them as much as you can. Now at the bottom in the green box, you should have learned these skills. So we learned in this unit to use a chart to separate risks and outcomes. So we used a T table and we used a Venn diagram. Identify amounts and cardinal and ordinal numbers. We did this. So again, we talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Then we talked about first, second, third, fourth, and so on. I can use word families. So converting a noun into a verb, into an adjective, and so on. And today we learned about past perfect, contraction of had, and how to give a short presentation. So this is what you have learned in this unit. And the objective of this unit was to gather information and ideas to give a short presentation on a risk I have taken. So hopefully you have benefited from this lesson and you are able to give a good presentation in the future. Now for next lesson we will move on to Unit 6. In Unit 6 the objective is to explain your opinions about our responsibility for issues impacting the world. So what I want you to do before next lesson, think about the issues that are impacting our world. Could be global warming, recycling, or even now, pandemic with the coronavirus. And think about our responsibility. Are we responsible for the world we live in? Are we responsible for global warming, for recycling, for the viruses that have spread? So this is something to think about before we start next week's lesson. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.